Chris Langan is a bouncer who took a fake IQ test from the back of a sci-fi magazine and got a super high score on the second try, and has been trying to make a career off of it for decades now. People who are into woo love him because he claims to be able to prove that God exists with math. He hasn't submitted his theories to legitimate peer-reviewed publications because, according to him, scientists are all either too stupid or too corrupt to recognize the brilliance of his ideas. He claims to have a theory of everything called the CTMU that also proves that God exists, but his argument is essentially the same as the one the idealist philosopher George Berkeley gave in the 1700s.
Okay, well, the theory is developed by a means called logical induction. You start with, you've heard of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, right? Cogito ergo sum, which is, I think, therefore I am. And you've heard of Berkeley's Atheist, okay, which is basically to be is to be perceived or to perceive, right? You start with perception and cognition. Then you develop the minimal model of how cognition and perception work. Then you induce an overall system that works by those processes.
Okay, so that was his explanation for how he derives the CTMU. So he starts with Descartes, the cogito, I think, therefore I am. And with Berkeley, who was like a philosopher in the 1700s, who had like basically this argument for idealism, right? That all of the normal objects that we interact with or know are ideas that we're interacting with in our head. And like basically saying that in order for something to exist, for something to be real, it must be perceived or it must perceive. So it's like an argument for idealism from, again, the 1700s.
George Berkeley believed that it was incoherent to say that anything exists independent of minds, concepts, and perceptions, because when we think of things, we can't actually think of the things themselves, we think of concepts which represent them. Since we can't import the things themselves into our minds, it's incoherent to say that they exist independent of the concepts that represent them. For example, Berkeley believed that it is incoherent to say that there exists a house that nobody thinks about, because you can't think of a house that nobody thinks about. I think Bertrand Russell had the best response to this, which was that I can understand the proposition, there is a house which no one perceives, or better still, there is a house which no one either perceives or conceives. You don't have to actually think of the house that nobody thinks about to understand what it means to say that it exists, therefore saying so is not incoherent. Berkeley's form of idealism has the further problem that if it is the case that you can't coherently think of matter existing independent of the concept which represents it, you can't coherently think of God independent of the concept which represents him. Berkeley says, besides spirits, all we know or conceive are our own ideas. Bertrand Russell explains that he ought not, of course, to make an exception for spirits, since it is just as impossible to know spirit as it is to know matter. Despite how goofy Langan clearly is, he has a disturbingly sycophantic fan base.
We have Sam on the line, I think. Hello?
Sam? Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam. Sam in Minnesota.
Oh, hey.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. How about you guys?
Good. Just fine, thanks.
Great. Yeah, I think that I have the greatest truth claim in the world.
Wow, that's quite a claim.
Yeah, I think it's not gonna this episode, obviously, but when it gets proven, I think it'll put an end to your show and every single atheist show.
Well, good. Then I'll get my Sundays back.
Yeah.
This is a guy who would send me rants back in the day about how Chris Langan was going to publish a book of his theories, and it was going to save the world or something. I made a video about him before.
He keeps sending me messages and leaving all caps comments on my videos. Like this one that says, by the way, just so everyone knows that I've been messaging TMM how that I visited Chris Langan's property 3 times and talked with him for a total between 15 to 20 hours probably and did a lot of work for him on his ranch and mega foundation. And he is definitely for real, but TMM won't respond because now he'll be challenged. Now he'll be proven wrong, and yes, what Chris says is pretty much gospel. Have you looked to the windows above TMM? He has. I have no idea what that means. And your video on Gog and Magog, I gave you links that directly answer the problem in no time flat, and you won't look at them. Asked for a discussion and got no response. Starting to question if you're honest, I'll still offer you a back and forth dialogue. TMM just knows anything I can't answer or question he has about the CTMU. I can go right down to Chris's property and come back with the answer. You'd think someone would respond to that, except only if they'd rather have their ears tickled and not want the truth.
Geez, I was really loud back then. Anyway, this is the same guy who called into the Atheist Experience.
No, the dialogue needs to happen until one thing's proven, but it's
Sure.
proof of God's coming. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, how
do you-
soon
you-
do you think we'll have this?
Yeah, can we have a time frame?
As we get discussing, we'll get to that, I'm sure. It's coming.
Okay.
I think that there is a one world religion coming.
Well, that would be a change from all
It
these
would.
religions splitting off from each other.
Well, actually, I can explain that too. It explains why there's so many religions.
Okay.
But have you guys heard of Chris Langan?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Which I know you were in the little chat box. there,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I have some inside information on it because I've actually taken the trip to meet him in person on 4 different occasions.
If we assume that these meetings didn't just occur in this guy's imagination, he was pretty thoroughly brainwashed by Chris Langan.
Okay, so I'll just throw this out there, that about the Proof of God book itself. He says that he can prove the existence of God mathematically with 80 symbols. 80 symbols or less, but the bulk of the book is explaining those symbols. Then once you understand what each symbol means, the equation, he said, is as clear as day. He said Lawrence Krauss would start jumping up and down.
Has he run this by Lawrence Krauss or anybody else? Or has he just read it himself over and over again and said, yep, that's going to convince everybody?
He's spent several years working on it, but it's not
Yeah, but
published yet,
has he run it by anyone else besides you?
He didn't. I didn't get to see the book. He's ran it by his wife.
This is a consistent pattern, not just with Chris Langan's fans, but with Chris himself. He's got all these brilliant ideas, but he won't submit them for peer review to any publication except for intelligent design journals.
If he wants to publicly bash people who have actual accomplishments that are a lot harder than the questions he found on the back of this magazine, then he needs to commit to an actual hard science and actually do something and not just books on philosophy. He's claimed real accomplishments, like that he solved the famously unsolved P versus NP problem, which is a math problem with $1 million prize, but says he won't submit the solution because he says that the biased prize committee wouldn't accept his solution if he did.
I also worry that Chris's followers might be absorbing some of his more troubling ideas.
On Facebook in 2019, Chris said that gorillas, quote, have a group mean IQ at least equal to that of Somalia, and asked why we admit African refugees but not gorillas, since they have the same IQ and are less violent. He cites Somalia's IQ at 68, while Coco the gorilla's IQ was measured between 75 and 95. What he probably doesn't realize is that Coco's IQ estimate comes from an IQ test designed for infants, that is, children under 12 months old, while the number he cites for Somalians, 68, is from a normal IQ test. But I guess the smartest man in the world doesn't need to check his sources because he's only supporting racism. It's not like it's anything important. To make things worse, the Somalian IQ test wasn't given to adults, but rather to Somali children living in a refugee camp in Kenya, and the test itself was measured against students from the UK. I guess it's really groundbreaking news that malnourished children from a refugee camp did worse than British kids from a first world country.
It's not surprising that folks like Michael Knowles love this guy. But how do we know this guy is as smart as he says he is? Well, he took an IQ test that's not actually an IQ test. It was a test he found in the back of Omni magazine, and you can tell from the questions that they are just asking you trivia. They are asking you things that you can just look up. That's not how IQ tests work.
It gets worse, though, as the questions get less and less about actually being hard to figure out and more about just sounding smart. Question 17 asks, a four-sided polyhedron is to a tetrahedron as a four-dimensional hypercube is to what? The answer is a tesseract. This is the mathematical name for this, and a tesseract is the mathematical name to that. This just reeks of some snooty, pretentious person trying their absolute hardest to sound smart. There is nothing hard about this question. That is, as long as you happen to know the math name for a 4-dimensional hypercube and have the extremely surface level understanding that both of these shapes are known for having equal sides. The obvious solution to this test is not to be smart, but just to pore through a dictionary for hours until you know the technical name for this and the technical name for that. Again, on question 2, heel is to Achilles as box is to what? This is referring to Pandora's box, a Greek myth. The Achilles heel is a Greek myth. Pandora's box is a Greek myth. There's nothing hard about this problem as long as you know the title to both these myths.
He took another test called the Weiss 3 test, but that couldn't possibly establish his IQ to be anywhere near 200 because it caps out at 150. In fact, no IQ test result above 150 is at all reliable, because so few people have IQs that high that there's not a big enough sample size to confirm the accuracy of such a result. Also, you'd think a guy who was so super smart would be able to actually accomplish something, but instead he just works on a ranch and complains about how the establishment doesn't take him seriously. He reminds me of Eric Weinstein in that regard, but while I think Eric believes his nonsense, I have a lot more suspicion that for Langan he knows what he's saying is BS.
I'm going to read this. This document is an attempt to begin recovering a rather more complete theory, which at this point is only partially remembered and stitched together from old computer files, notebooks, recordings, and the like, dating back to as far as 1983. And this is why this paper is not going to appear in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not serious. It's not dog ate my homework kind of thing. If you have a dark matter thing, if you have a dark matter prediction, if you have a dark energy prediction, I want to see a plot in the paper. I want to see redshift versus distance. I want to see a calculation of a relic abundance so I can figure out how much dark matter is supposed to be. If you do that, people will pay attention to the theory. It's very possible.
Sean, first of all, how dare you?
Chris Langan has the same energy, but at least Eric doesn't seem to have sycophants as big as Sam.
As she says, she can explain everything. I mean, she was a psychology professor.
Okay.
I'm still confused about where this is going.
Chris's fan here is more interested in glazing Chris than giving an argument, as though people will be convinced if they could only be as impressed by Chris as he is.
Today.
Oh,
Yeah, you should just put up the argument.
can I just talk? I'll just talk about what he said in person that you can assess
But
yourself.
I'm okay with that, but we're not just going to hear about, like, he's got a book coming out about symbols, right? There's going to be something substantial.
Yes, there's content.
Okay.
Yeah, there's content, there's dialogue. Okay. So I'll just say certain highlights that we talked about. The one thing when I talked with his wife, she said that if he died today, she could spend the rest of her life publishing everything he has written. He's got thousands upon thousands of pages on every subject from computer science to economics.
Hey, this is irrelevant. Can we get to the relevant part?
He never actually gets to the relevant part.
I have a master's in computer science, and nobody has ever referenced the work of Chris Langan to learn any kind of technique. So I don't know what he's publishing on computer science.
He's gonna put it all out there one day, and it'll be irrefutable. He said, "But okay."
Wow.
I asked him, so how? I was asking him, okay, because I was like moving my hand to gesture, objective empirical data. How can you prove the existence of God mathematically? And he says he's had certain spiritual experiences. And,
that's not mathematical proof.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like mathematical proof at all.
I can't wait to see Chris submit his spiritual experiences for peer review.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.